Says it's recording.
Okay, Michael, you were saying you've been first tell me a little bit about the type of stuff you shoot.
Well, I think that you've seen a lot of it over the years. I just shoot still life now. I'm pretty old, so I don't do a lot. I mean, I watch what you're doing. I can't hike way up into the beyond right anymore. So I could, but that's why I'd like to get a smaller camera. But uh, I shoot still life, plants, animals. You know, if it's summertime, I'm outside. If it's wintertime, I have a studio inside. So that's what I
Yeah,
do.
but most of it's inside in the studio. You got artificial lighting, that kind of stuff.
I have everything you can
Okay.
imagine.
Yeah, you kind of went nuts on the was it the gear acquisition syndrome, the gas problem? But
No, but not any more than I am in anything else. But the
like
first thing I do is buy all the equipment that you would need for anything. But remember, I've done a lot of different things. Photography is just a hobby. Uh,
yeah,
I'm an archivist, right? I've archived millions of documents with 150 full-time people. So
yeah. So about a couple dozen camera lenses is pretty much the norm for you in that context.
no, I have 100 and some lenses.
Okay. All right. Well, your question to me, I think, was you were considering switching to medium format uh, for this photography of yours. In my head, I see like some beautiful flowers, and you're trying to do that type of stuff. So, what makes you think you want to switch to medium format?
Well, what part of it you're to blame for constantly interesting me in medium format because you're no longer using Nikon, which we did. And so that was easy for me to follow. It's much harder now to follow you because I don't have the same camera that you're using. So that's one of the ideas. But also, I have questions about one of the big questions I have is if I move to medium format like the X2D or whatever it is, or the GFX 100S or whatever it is, uh, what happens with diffraction? I think there's a difference between 35 millimeter format and the diffraction for a larger sensor. Uh, That's something that sometime I'd like you to explain to me because I think that it's a much bigger problem on the medium format than it is on a smaller sensor. True or not?
Well, it's true and it's not true.
Okay, well,
And
there we go.
so, why don't I
I'm,
give you a solid answer?
yeah, that would be good.
Uh, it's true that let's say you're shooting a 50 millimeter lens at f8, diffraction is identical on every camera. Doesn't matter what it is. Diffraction mean when I say diffraction in our context here, what I mean is you have a certain size pixel on the sensor, and I say on a GFX 100S, that's 3.76 microns. That's the same thing as on a Sony A7R5. So assuming the same pixel density, diffraction is identical. A 50 millimeter at f8 is the same amount of diffraction. The issue that arises, though, is that when you go to medium format, the focal length grows longer to get the same field of view. And when the focal length goes longer, you're going to need to stop down more for the same depth of field. And therefore, you're not going to be shooting at f8 on your Fujifilm to get the same depth of field. You're going to be shooting at around f10.
Wow.
Therefore, in a sense, there is more diffraction because to get the same depth of field for the same field of view, you have to shoot about 2/3 of a stop more stop down on the medium format than the 35 millimeter.
Got it.
So one answer is yes, there's more diffraction because the equivalent aperture is f10 instead of f8, and that's a very noticeable difference in diffraction terms. The other answer is, well, if you're doing focus stacking like you do,
Right.
which is pretty much mandatory for most of your shots, maybe not all of them, but
Most of it.
okay, so then you can sort of swap that compromise for taking more shots at the same aperture. In other words, if you're going to shoot it at f8 on 35 millimeter, you can shoot it at f8 on medium format, but you're going to have to take about twice as many shots to do the stack. So because the depth of field is thinned out on the medium format, you take more shots to cover the range you want to cover. So
Right.
maybe on your Nikon you took, I don't know, 18 shots, and on the Fuji now you're going to take 30 or 35 or whatever it happens to be. So in that case, since they're both at f8, the diffraction will be identical. Same size
I see.
pixels. Yep, but in the case of the Fujifilm, the advantage is you've got a much bigger sensor, so you've got twice the megapixels, 100 instead of 45.
Right.
But where you pay is taking more shots to achieve the same stack depth with sharpness.
I see.
Um,
I typically take like often 100 layers, 100 shots. So I'd be taking 200
yes,
to cover the
yes,
same distance, right?
yeah, and you're certainly going to want to use compressed RAW for that, just to get the size down to a regional range. And there's not really any way around that. You're just going to have to take more shots, and you're going to need more storage and so on. That's kind of life, it's kind of the no free lunch principle. You want more megapixels and you get a bigger sensor, you're going to have to take more shots. It's kind of like pushing on a balloon. It's going to push in here and bulge out on the other side. You're not going to get something for free.
So what's the benefit then of, what do I get that's positive and so wonderful about the medium format?
Well, from what I've seen, if you look at the Fujifilm GFX 100S, it has the same generation of sensor technology as the Sony A7R5. More, maybe there's some little tweaks that each vendor did, but basically it's the same generation. I really don't see much difference, if any, there. What you do get is, if you have 100 megapixels instead of 60, you've got more pixels to cover the same area, and therefore on a per pixel basis, you've just got more covering the same area. Therefore, any noise or anything else going on is going to be reduced relative to the number of pixels, 100 versus 60 or 45. So you do get this effective quality jump. Most people think of the 100 megapixel thing as, oh, gee, I'm going to get 100 megapixels now. Let's see how sharp my images are going to be. But I think that's actually a secondary characteristic versus sampling the same image with more pixels. And
But
therefore,
aren't the pixels smaller on the 100?
the pixels on the 100 are the same size as on a Sony A7R5.
Okay.
They're slightly smaller than on your Nikon, which is 45 megapixels. But a 60 megapixel Sony is exactly the same pixel pitch as on the Fujifilm. In other words, if you took that Fujifilm and you cropped 35 millimeter out of the center part of the frame, you'd have the same image as you'd get on the Sony.
I have a question. What does that make? Then I come away with thinking that 60 megapixels is kind of a happy medium. It might be better than having more.
Well, it might be, and I'm actually not sure, given your thinking here, whether you would actually benefit much from medium format. But there's another consideration, which is the aspect ratio. If you're used to shooting your images in a 3:2, I'm exaggerating, let's say 3:2, and now you go to 4:3, well, maybe you still want a 3:2, so you crop off the top and the bottom. Now you're down to something like, I think it's like 88 megapixels. So now we're talking about 88 versus 60. And it's on a larger area, so there's some quality difference there, but you've also got to take all these extra frames. So at the end of it, are you really going to get that much better a picture?
I don't know.
And I think you, being a discerning user, you'll probably notice a difference just because you got more pixels. Because I know you nail your exposures down real tight, right? You got all that technical stuff nailed. So for the same sensor generation, I don't really think it's going to be any different. But you got more pixels, so that alone can give you this more seamless, continuous look just by having more pixels sampling the same tiny details within that image. Now, I might make an exception to that if you went to the Fujifilm GFX 102. Now, what they've done there is they've given you a base ISO of 80, and as far as I can tell, they've thrown in some secret sauce on top of that hamburger, and it just tastes a little more juicy to me than the GFX 100S. In fact, when I shot this fall, I went out, I shot for a month. I shot very heavily with it. I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000 frames. A lot of those are focus stacks, so we're not talking 3,000 or 4,000 individual shots. But when I came back home and I started processing that stuff, it's like, man, these just look good. And I didn't want to go back to my GFX 100S. It was enough of an impression of that nature that now I feel kind of like I'm forced to use kind of a second best camera on the GFX 100S, which is what I own still. So I don't have $7,500 to run out and buy a 102. So I think you'd see more of a difference on the 102. I mean, I've learned after 15 years of doing all the stuff I do, when my brain tells me there's something going on here after I look at hundreds of captures, my brain keeps saying, boy, this looks good. Boy, this looks good. I've learned to respect that. So I haven't proven this in some kind of A/B. Well, I have actually shot an A/B and it does look better to me, but that's my feeling about the 102. So 100S, I would say, is probably about the same as the Sony in terms of pixel quality, but you're getting more pixels, and that's really what I would put it down as, is a more pixel situation.
I have another question here. I remember when you first had the Sony A1, you really loved it. You said what a wonderful thing it was to shoot. So that quality, I feel that way about the Nikons basically. I'm really used to whatever's good about them. It sounds like the way you write about the GFXs or whatever they are, there's a lot not to like that you somehow have to work around.
The way I'd put it with the GFX system, and I've been over this with a good friend of mine, Claude Fiddler. We went out in the field together and actually handled the camera, and I showed him how it operated. And he was kind of aghast at first, like, are you shitting me? I mean, is that much of a hassle to do that? And so the way I put the GFX 100S is, if I have to go out and shoot landscape, I'm going to take the GFX 100S because the end result, I can get something better. And I get 4:3, which just seems to work better for me for landscape. I prefer it over 3:2. But the actual operation of it, the thing drives me crazy.
That's what I'm trying to get a feel for, right? What's so bad?
There's things as simple as the EVF quality is terrible. I mean,
I thought, don't they all have the same, or the EVF? I thought they all had pretty, or let's take the monitor. They all have about the same 2.63,
yeah,
360.
The rear one's pretty similar, but let me be clear. The GFX 102, the EVF in that is fantastic. It's the best in the entire industry.
And what does it cost?
And it's way better than the 100S. When I was out in the field with both of them, the 102 and the 100S, I'd look through one and I'd look through the other, and it's like, I don't even want to shoot this 100S. The EVF just looks so crappy. The 102 is beautiful. It's a 1.0x magnification. Everything is good about it. It's nothing better out there. So I'm comparing this. I was saying, my comment was about the Sony A7R5 versus the 100S EVF. Then you've got review speed. How quickly can you scroll through an image? It's on the 100S, it's pretty bad. On the 102, it's terrific. So we're talking a generational 5-year gap between those two cameras, and about a $3,000 price difference. 4,400 versus 7,500. So you do get something for your money. And I do have a video where I talk about all these things that I posted, about 6 weeks ago. I probably should have pointed you at that, where I discuss what I really feel are the attributes of the 100S versus the 102. I mean, it's almost, to me, like, if you're going to switch to medium format, you probably need to pony up the money for the 102. That
I see.
That's what I would do. I think maybe the Hasselblad.
What about the X2D?
Hasselblad.
I mean, it looks beautiful.
They designed it to be beautiful, but I'd liken it to an Apple product. Apple products look beautiful, and then they sacrifice form for function all too often.
I mean,
right?
Form's more important.
Yeah, and the X2D is kind of like that. It's short, like 3 buttons that I'd like. It was very slow in some operational things. There's just a bunch of goofy, dumb things that were in it. Now, to be fair to it, when I tested it, software version was 1.0, and then some things I complained about got fixed in 1.1, and then they added focus stacking to it. So I haven't reviewed it since then, and so it may have significant improvements. But for my way of working, which may not be yours at all in the studio, I'm not working off that rear LCD. I'm working off the EVF. And it's really important to me that I can get around with buttons while I'm looking through an EVF.
And I'm the reverse. I work off the monitor.
Yeah, so you might not have any bad reaction to it at all. And
what about the result? What about the color?
The color in Hasselblad probably is second to none. However, I didn't have a chance to shoot it against the GFX 102, whereas I
Oh,
said has, to my eyes, a very appreciable improvement in the look of its images. So prior to the GFX 102, I would have just said unequivocally that the X2D had the best overall look and feel to its images, to my eyes. With 102, now I'm less sure about that, and I'd really have to shoot them side by side.
I see.
And yeah, so there's no question the X2T has fantastic color. Hasselblad has clearly put a lot of work into it. They don't have the flexibility though of the GFX models. You know, with the GFX, if you're in Adobe Camera Raw, you get what 8 or 10 film profiles.
Right.
Those save me a tremendous amount of time, especially for landscape shooting, because I can pick among several and get different looks right out of the back. They immediately alter the image dramatically. With Hasselblad, you get a D&G with one profile. You get what you get. There's no like, pick this other one and see if you like it better. So they do have some advantages there in certain respects.
Also, the lenses, not much lenses for Hasselblad that are really fast and light. The new lenses are not many.
I don't know. There's a pretty broad range at this point,
Not
but they
not not much macro.
Oh, macro. Well, they're both weak on macro. I mean, the GFX just has, isn't it just the 120 macro,
Right.
and the Hasselblad has the 120 macro. So, I'm not sure there's much of a difference there. Realistically, that'd be another reason to stick with 35 millimeter because you have such a wide range of lenses. But maybe you're settling down on 2 or 3. But you don't have that. You could you'd have to adapt older medium format lenses to the Hasselblad or to the GFX to have much choice. And of course, they got to be medium format lenses to cover the sensor adequately. And my very strong advice here would be is you do not want a manual focus lens for focus stacking when you're going to shoot 100 frames.
Well, I mean, I can do it both ways. I've done over 1 million images, right?
Yeah,
I've done it for many, many years. So
well,
I can do I do a lot of just on a rail focus rail. But mostly I'm using the automatic focus stacking of the new S lenses, right? It works
yes,
pretty, but I really wish they could let me have parameters front and back.
yeah. The Nikon, they don't have a rear. I'm forgetting on that.
They
GFX
don't.
does have a front and a rear, so
Oh, that's great.
it's confusing as heck to figure it out. So much so that I gave up using it. But in the studio, I'm sure you can manage it just fine. Well, what I meant, I'll speak for myself then. If I'm out in the field, first of all, the lighting's changing fast enough. There's no way I can manually stack an image with any reliable
Oh,
success
okay.
rate. That's just not, it's not a thing.
Right.
It's bad enough automated at, 2 frames a second to get past some lighting conditions, which, takes
No,
10
that's right.
seconds. Your light, you just screws your whole series. So in my mind, when you go to more frames on the medium format, I think you really need it to be automated, and I don't think you're going to get lenses in the same league as the 120 macros on those platforms as from an older design. You might get a different look that you like, but I don't think you're going to get the same acute lens performance. So yeah, and you're doing mostly close-up stuff too. So I'm not sure. I mean, what would medium format give you? It would give you a longer focal length. And all things, in theory, that's supposed to work out the same if the lens design is the same type of lens design, according to Hubert Nasa. There's a piece on that in my Zeiss guide. But in practice, it actually tends to look different. So you'd be shooting with that 120 macro, and it's going to give you that longer, more medium format look, I think. So it will change the look of your photos most likely. Now, maybe you could go to a 150 on the Nikon and get the same look. That would probably accomplish the same thing. I don't know if they.
I have to ask a question which probably doesn't fit into this. Is that why have you abandoned Nikon just because you wanted the greater pixel density?
It's not that I've abandoned Nikon per
kind
se.
of.
There's a lot of factors that come to that. I review Canon, Nikon, Leica, Hasselblad, Fujifilm, Sony.
Yeah.
I can only afford to buy 1 or 2 systems.
No kidding.
The most popular one is Sony and and then Fujifilm in medium format. So I'd like to have a Nikon system, but at this point, Nikon has also gone into this like sports mode. Their Z8 and Z9 offerings are not exactly landscaper cameras. They
No,
don't have a 60 megapixel offering, which is kind of marginal compared to 45, but we've been
I,
sitting at 45 now for what, six,
I
7 years.
agree. Totally right.
So, and it took them a while to get their lens line up to snuff.
What do you think
And
of the new lens line?
I think the look of the Nikon lenses is fantastic. I mean, I think you have the same impression based on what you used. I'm actually quite disappointed in certain of the lenses as practical all around camera lenses. For example, their 51.2 I reviewed last spring, and I own the Sony 51.2, so I know that specifically, and it's got its own minor issues, but it's a beautiful rendering lens, and so is the Nikon. However, when you shoot the Nikon, if you want to apply it to, say, landscape use, there's a big problem. It has this field that goes and shifts like a, well, I'll skip the profanity, like a mofo, like this. So
Right.
you go from 1.2 with a real nice sharp image in a flat field, and then it starts to curve on you and shift way closer to the camera. So as a landscape lens, it's pretty much useless. There's no way I could shoot that thing. And so it's great if you're taking people pictures or something, but out on landscape, no good. So in other words, the Sony lens is very well behaved. I can use it for landscape. I can use it for people. It's much better all arounder. So beautiful look out of the Nikon, but it's not a general purpose lens. It's designed clearly for portraiture or things like that. And
okay, that's just one of the. What about the macro, the 105 MC S?
well, I never got to shoot that. I have no doubt that it's a great lens, but I don't shoot macro.
It's a great lens.
I believe you. Just I don't like shooting macro, so I don't. That doesn't mean anything to me.
I don't think of myself as a macro shooter. I'm a close-up. Close-up.
Yeah, you're not really macro, but you're indoors. But thinking outdoors, look at Sony. They got a lens that is unrivaled. They got a 12-24 f2.8, which beats out every prime easily that I tested it against. Certainly beats every other zoom out there. Nikon's 14-24 is also a very strong lens, but at the wide end, but gets pretty darn weak at the long end, so that's not very satisfactory. And it doesn't go to 12; it's only at 14, which is a huge difference out there in the field.
But they have two of those. I mean, one goes to 30.
Yeah, that one's a so-so lens. I wouldn't even consider it. The 14-24 is a very good lens, but only until maybe 18-20 millimeters, at which point I give up on it.
Yeah, I have that lens. So
yeah, again, beautiful look, no complaints there. It's just I don't think it's up to the level of Sony, and it doesn't have the range. The Sony is astonishing in that the entire range is just spectacularly good from 12-24. I can't find a prime lens in there that beats it in that range. It's kind of unprecedented with the zoom. So you can't say that about the Nikon. I also don't like the fact that some of the Nikon lenses, especially the early ones, had horrific focus shift. So as a landscape shooter, I'm often shooting
about the mirrorless ones or the early ones?
The mirrorless ones, yes, like the 35-1.8 and the 55. When I first reviewed those, just terrible focus shift. I have it in my review, and for most shooters, it doesn't matter because the camera deals with it in its AF system. But when it's dusk and you need to focus wide open because it's dusk, you can't, and that's a big problem. And then I had like the 51.2, and I was getting focus errors on it last fall. I mean, I watched it not even be able to focus at f1.2, which drove me crazy. So I don't want to beat up Nikon. Every lens line has some problem performers, but I just felt that in general, the Nikon lenses were more compromised. And then my other gripe is that a lot of the lenses I would use as a landscape photographer have built-in required distortion correction. And if there's one thing that pisses me off, it's a camera vendor that sets an exit flag that says, you got to correct this distortion. So you get a 24-1.8, a 21-1.8, whatever it is, and you process that in ACR, and it requires that you just correct the distortion, and now your sharp image is sort of a mushy image. And there's nothing you can do about it. So that sort of thing drives me batshit crazy. And it just took a long time for Nikon to get their lens lines going too. So if I were starting from scratch now, I'd still go with Sony. I got all the Sony lenses. I got a bunch of fantastic Voigtlander lenses, most of which are now available for Nikon. So I can't. That's not.
I know all the Voigtlanders. I had the 65. I still have that, but it's too sharp. It's a little. No, it can be,
Not for landscape, right? So, but yeah,
no,
for
maybe not for landscape, you're right, but for close-up it is. But I had,
yeah,
I had a Sony version of that as well, but think I sold it, I hope.
yeah,
So
it's
I
a
should,
great.
but you're saying I should get an R75 or whatever it is. You're happy with that, big time.
I'm happy with it for what I use it for, except their focus stacking feature with some lenses at infinity, which is the same problem the Fujifilm has. Neither of which would affect you for what you do.
I see.
Basically, they didn't compute in the field curvature lens. So, like on the 12 to 24, you're always one frame short of where you should be
Oh,
when you do the automated focus stacking. Well, only when you need to go to infinity. If you're doing your stuff, you're not
I
anywhere
don't,
near.
no, I don't do that.
Fujifilm has the same problem. Reported it 5 years ago, and they've never fixed it yet. But a lens I really like on Nikon is the 70-200 zoom. It's probably the best one I've seen so far.
It's a wonderful, what about the 2470? That's pretty good. Both of
It's a
them.
it's a very nice lens also.
Yeah.
I don't like any 2470s because they are so distorted on the wide and the long end that, see, if you're doing landscape, sometimes you stitch also. So now you got a lens that has distortion. So you take my screen keeps going off here. You've got to correct this distortion. So right away you drop yourself from 60 to 50 megapixels just because of the distortion correction. And then you're trying to stitch. So you got this warped image, which has to be unwarped so you can pull things together. So I don't like 24 to 70 zooms in general. But if we're talking about them, I'd like a good copy of the Canon 24 to 70 f2. That's a beautiful lens. But yeah, Nikon's is good.
Okay, so I didn't realize you were so landscape oriented. I should have. But I said, what about the Plena? Have you tried it?
I haven't tested the Plena.
It's a really beautiful lens.
Oh, I'm sure it is. Yeah. It's like a lot of things in life. Some people like bicycles, some people like lenses, and it's like you need to own at least 6 bicycles to be a proper cyclist. I mean, I own 8 myself, but
well, you really do. I mean, I used to have a Lignano back in the 60s of all Italian, all Campagnolo, beautiful bike.
yeah,
I had to lived in Berkeley and I had to go over Grizzly Peak to Orinda every day and back.
Yeah, that's probably why you're alive and kicking now.
Oh, it could be. I mean, I'm just, I'm 80, I'm going to be 83, so it's rough.
Yeah, so I guess my advice to you is your meeting will end in 10 minutes. Upgrade now. Not now. Okay. I guess we're going to be cut off in 10 minutes.
Oh, I shouldn't be cut off ever. But
yeah, but I've got the free version. Maybe they're cutting me off. I don't know. Maybe it's the iPad. But
that's okay. I mean, we're getting.
We got 10 more minutes. But I guess my general advice to you is I'm not sure medium format's a great selection for what you're trying to do.
Right.
You got the lenses you like. You're familiar with the system. You're going to have to spend a lot of money. Then you're going to have to take a lot more pictures. And now we didn't mention this, but on your computer, if you've got 2.2x the pixels and 2x the frames, that's 4.4x the data. So your computer is now choking on a task that's over 4 times larger. Now, maybe that's fine. You can walk away from it, but I'm not sure how well that's going to feel when you actually have
well, I mean, I have lots of hard drives and stuff. I have about 80 of them. So yeah, I have a lot of, I've saved every shot because I'm now going back over the stack and then picking out ones in the stack and then doing a stack just on those. If you haven't tried that, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I've done that quite a few times. I'm just saying that for me, like if the focus stack is going to take an hour instead of 10 minutes, the creative feedback loop is really bad because if I have 200 stacks from a trip, I can't sit around on a slow computer waiting for that stuff to stack. I'll just never even look at certain things. I'll see a single image and then have to decide based on that. So in your case, you invest so much time and effort into making that shot that maybe that's not an issue. But if you run out of memory, it's not going to be fun having the thing churn away all night. So you'll probably be okay with 64 gigs. Are you using Zerine Stacker still?
You what? Yeah, I am. I love it.
Yeah. I think you'll still be okay with that. But it could start getting tight with 200 images, 100 megapixels.
I love Zerine Stacker. I mean, I've become really good at retouching. I'm sure you have too.
Yeah, you have to.
Almost do anything with it.
But some shots just can't work.
No,
Recently
no.
talked with Rick Littlefield about a shot I had made, and he basically says, "I don't know how you can make this work," so I just threw the series away and gave up. I mean,
He's a great guy, right? He's
oh
really
yeah,
dedicated to his software.
yeah, yeah. If you got a
Very
problem with, he might send you
very few
fixed.
people like that. I mean, in the world that I've known, a lot of software people, he's unusual.
Yes. Well, not really. In a sense, he is. In a sense, I would put him in the same camp as a certain type of developer who's willing to develop software on their own and sell it to the world. And it's kind of niche software, and they do it as kind of a labor of love. So that
Yeah,
class of people, he's one of those. Of
yeah,
course, you're right. That's a small group of people.
yeah, true.
Um, yeah. Anyway,
Uh,
did you have? Did what other questions didn't I cover for you on this potential switch to medium format?
I think you've done pretty well in terms of, I mean, what I come away from is that I really don't want to get into the GFS or FX 100S or anything like that. I really would like an X2D, I think just for fun, but I don't have the money without selling a lot of stuff. I'm going to sell 50 or 60 lenses. I have
Mm.
all kinds of small, remember the early 55 millimeter micro Nikons, many different versions of it. I have all that stuff and I don't use it. I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to get rid of it. I wish I could find someone that I could just send it all to. I can't stand eBay.
Well, you probably can send it all to KEH or B&H, but you won't exactly get top dollar.
No, no, you sure won't.
Yeah.
Yeah, B&H is pretty professional. Can't, so is KEH. KEH, they're pretty good.
Yeah, but they got to make $1, so they're going to
Oh,
give you
no,
30.
I'm with them. How do
Yeah.
I want to spend the rest of my life doing that? I don't.
Yeah.
So,
Well, maybe somebody will hear this and contact, and they can contact you through me, and I'll forward their info along, and you can if they want to buy something.
yeah,
But
so I come away thinking maybe I ought to get a Sony, whatever it is, the 5.
A7R5.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what's your rationale there? Let's talk about that because
The rationale is being able to do pixel shift, which I think is going to start to get introduced into the Nikon cameras. It is already in one.
Nikon has a pixel shift in a
Yeah,
camera now.
what the ZF or whatever. Yeah, it absolutely does. You get basically 96 megapixel out of it.
The ZF, is that retro style one?
Yeah.
Oh,
It's,
okay.
I think it's that one. It's either that one or the one that came out about the same time.
Okay, because the Z8 doesn't have it, right? So
No, Z8 doesn't. I
well,
had a Z9 and sold it because it was just too heavy.
yeah. Well, pixel shift is effectively makes you something similar to a 100 megapixel camera.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Well, I like that.
that may be a reason to wait. And for what you're doing, also it may have a more subtle and more interesting effect, is that it will render, especially certain colors and textures, much more finely than
Oh, yeah.
just Bayer could. Now, of course, unless they do something that nobody's done before, which is to give you focus stacking plus pixel shift.
That would be fantastic.
Nobody's done that yet, so you'd have to do manual stacking to achieve that sort of.
But let me ask you this question. If I got a A7R5, what's the macro lens that's just superlative? What's the APO or Apple? What's the best macro lens could I get for it? Or would you get?
Well, to automate,
Or
you'd have to go with AF, right? And that would give you like the Sony 90 millimeter
okay,
and
is that what it is?
90
Okay,
millimeter f2.8.
I'm gonna write this down.
If you did manual focus, you'd get that Voigtlander 65 f2. That's what I'd go with.
I wouldn't. I mean, I
But
don't like it as much as you do. I've
yeah,
had one for a long time. I
well,
had two
remember
of them.
if you were capturing at 60 megapixels, you might not have the same reaction to it as you do at 45.
Okay,
So
that's probably
I wouldn't
true.
necessarily rule it out. It's more, to me, it's more about having to automate the stack versus having to manually do it. I understand you use the rail or whatever, but still, if you can press one button and it takes care of everything, that's awfully nice.
Well,
So
but the Voigtlander doesn't do that.
no, it can't. That's what I'm
That's what
saying
I'm.
is
Yeah, no,
that's
no.
why I probably just go with the 90 millimeter and make sure you have a good sample. I did test one. It's clearly it's an outstanding lens, but the one I had was also a little off. So it's like all other lenses, you got to make sure they're good before you keep them.
Yeah. I don't know I don't know enough probably to know how to test them right, other than just to
Well,
look at it.
for you, use it at close range. It's much less of a concern because for me, it's like if you point it at infinity and there's any swing or tilt of the lens, that's a serious problem at an infinity shot. But taking macro focus stack stuff, maybe you can't even notice it because of the 3D nature of the subject.
So if you said for landscape on Nikon, what's your favorite lens, or if you could have any one you wanted?
Well, I like that 14-24 lot, except at the long end, and then I'd get into then I like the Voigtlanders, the 35 and the 50.
Yeah. Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, I was just curious.
I did try their 28. Was it 28 75 or what the heck is that thing? No, it's 18 to 28. It's pretty much a turd. So small and light.
Did you ever get a chance to use the Nock 95?
No.
I have one, and it's a really wonderful lens, but it's really really heavy.
I like lenses like that, but when you look at the price tags on them, it's like
It's unbelievable. Okay. No, but it's so most beautiful bokeh or bokeh, whatever you want to call it. It reminds me of the CRT lens, if you ever used that. The Nikon CRT has got a 1.2. It also produces an incredible bokeh or whatever we call it.
Yeah, I think some of the Sony lenses have that quality, like their 51.2.
Mm-hmm.
Their what is it? Is it 105? What's the special apodized type lens? It's a 105-2.8. They have a different term for it, but there's an apodization effect. Fujifilm has a similar lens like that.
Oh, so I don't know that.
And it gives you this super nice gradated effect from center to the outside in an f2.8. It's more like T56 at f2.8. I haven't used that one for some years now, but so that Sony has some really beautiful looking lenses. Their 135 1.8 is gorgeous.
Yeah, I used to have a lot of Sony camera video. That's kind of where I come in. But I also, the earlier little Sonys, like you're talking, the A7, I had 2 or 3 of them, but I didn't like it.
I didn't like the early Sonys either. I mean, the Sony, it's a lot of people don't like. They say I don't like Sony ergonomics, but they base that on an A7R